to another super duper Uber video. Super duper Uber. Can you guys say that 5 times in a row? Super duper Uber, super duper Uber, super duper Uber, super duper Uber, super duper Uber. Woo, it's pretty hard. Why don't you guys try it for the next 10 seconds? 10 seconds, try it. Say it. Super duper Uber, 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 Uber, Uber. Yeah. Cool. Wow. It is a super duper Uber time that we have been having over the last couple of weeks with our Uber series, but we're actually away this weekend at Mountaintop Camp. But you guys will be following on the next part of our journey with Norm, and we're here to give you just a bit of insight into what we're going to be delving into today. The question for today is this. Are you guys ready?
Yes.
Esther, Dad, you ready for the question?
Yes. Go for it.
The question is this.
Let's do it.
When do you feel most alive?
I feel most alive when I get to Pepster and start doing stuff like doing Milo for the Pepster youth.
Woohoo! The Milo, yes.
Doing
Feel alive when I drink that Milo.
And
Sausage, give me life.
Yeah, and all that kind of stuff we do for people.
Yes.
I love helping people.
Oh,
yeah, and that is what make me come alive.
Thank you for sharing that. So deep. We do love all your Milos and buns and stuff at 360 Church. Do you guys love it? I know you guys love it. All right, Esther, over to you. What do you reckon? What makes you, when do you feel most alive?
I feel most alive. Probably when I am hanging out with my friends. I love them.
Guys, did you hear that? She feels most alive when she's with me.
Oh.
That is so amazing.
No, William.
That
I
is-
said when I'm with my friends.
Pulling on the heartstrings there, Esther. Pulling on the heartstrings.
No.
I might just cry one tear. One tear. Can you guys see it?
Crocodile tears.
Okay. Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us today with our question. Awesome.
Yeah, awesome.
Esther. And over to you, Norm. And everyone, hope you guys have an awesome Sabbath. Be blessed, everybody. Dab out. Dab out.
Yeah.
Dab out, Dad. Can you dab out? Like that. Yeah. Awesome.
Good morning, church. As you've heard, we're in a series called the Uber Gospel. This is where Jesus, when he arrived and started teaching about the kingdom of God, started teaching about who God was and what God's plan and purpose was for us, it was unconventional for his time. Everything the people, when Jesus spoke, what they heard him say, a lot of it often they couldn't understand. They couldn't make sense of. They were like, that is nothing that we were taught. What we grew up thinking and believing faith in God is about, or religion or our tradition and belief is about, Jesus, what you are saying is totally different to what we grew up with. Often as we encounter, and Jesus did this through stories, through parables, through metaphors. He painted these pictures of what the kingdom was like and encouraged people to step into that metaphor, try and tease it out, apply it to your life. And that's kind of what we're trying to do in this series today, because you see, the message of Jesus is still unconventional for our human way of thinking, for our human way of reasoning. It still challenges our assumptions and stereotypes about God and about faith. And so that is why we continue to look at and share these parables and stories of Jesus. If you've missed and you want to catch up, feel free to go to our website or to YouTube, Papster Church. Just Google that, or just Google papster.co.nz, and you can find and catch up on some of the talks you've missed. Last week we were in Luke chapter 11. I invite you to grab the Bible in the seat pocket in front of you, the Bible on your device, or any Bible around you. Grab your neighbors if you must, and join us in Luke chapter 15. The Bible in the seat pocket in front of you, it's page 628. If you do not own your own Bible, take this. It is our gift to you. We want you to have it. And Jesus was telling a series of parables here, a series of stories. We touched on the first two last week. And this week we're looking at verse 11 to 24. And it starts off and says, to illustrate the point further, Jesus told a story. What point was he making? Who was Jesus talking to? We discovered this last week. He was talking to the Pharisees and the teachers of the religious law. He was talking to the church. If you've grown up in church all your life, or if you've been in church for more than 6 years, Jesus was talking to you and I. That's who he's addressing these stories to. Who was Jesus with? Jesus was with, the Bible says, tax collectors and notorious sinners, or the common people. He was with those that society despised and that the religious community didn't want to associate with at all. That's who Jesus was with. And the tension arose because the church were looking at Jesus and going, what are you doing mixing with those people? Why are you hanging with sinners? And that's when, out of that context, Jesus told these parables. And we discovered last week that the point Jesus was making. We also learned last week this, by the way, that people that were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus, and Jesus liked them back. Think about that. People that were nothing like Jesus, and Jesus liked them back. Are people who are nothing like you, are they comfortable in your presence? Do they feel accepted in your company? Do they feel at home, even though they don't share your same beliefs or views? The point Jesus was making with the stories that he told was that God's heart is for the lost. There is joy in heaven when the lost sheep comes home. There is joy in heaven when the lost coin is found. God's heart is for the lost. And I guess the thought that we walked away with is, where is ours? Where is yours? Is your heart for those that are far from God as well? I'm going to invite my volunteers to come forward, because Jesus carries on with this parable, verse 11, and he says, a man had 2 sons. A man had 2 sons. The youngest son told his father, I want my share of the estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his 2 sons. A few days later, this youngest son packed up all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted his money on wild living. So a father had 2 sons, younger brother and older brother. As Jesus is telling this, in these few verses, the people that were listening to him, they would have made a whole lot of assumptions. They would have understood a whole lot of context. They would have heard what Jesus was saying, and immediately their ears would have been pricked, because here's what they understood that we don't always get when we look at it in this day and age. But they would have understood that this was a wealthy family. This was a wealthy family because the father owned an estate. He didn't only own an estate, we'll find out later, he had servants. He had slaves, he had hired servants, and not only that, but when the father threw a party, he killed a fatted calf. Now, a fatted calf could feed about 200 people back in that day and age. So the village came to the party that the father held. They were obviously wealthy. The village probably existed because of the father's estate. And everyone that was in the village had their loyalty, and they were sustained and maintained by the father of this estate. That is what they would have understood. So that's the picture. This wealthy landowner, the village exists because of this valuable estate. They also lived in what was known as an honor-shame culture. The primary purpose or the best way to maintain relationship in the culture was to give honor where honor was due, was to give honor to those in authority. So the landowner, he would have been called the Lord of the estate, Kyrios, the Lord of the estate. He would have received the honor of the village, the honor of his children. And if you did not give appropriate honor, what was expected in that culture was that you would be shamed. You would be shamed by the family, shamed by the community if you did not show appropriate honor, we still see this in the Eastern context today, this shame, honor culture that they lived in. The audience comes to know and understand the characters by these things. The younger brother, by what he does. You can flip your card. The father, by what he gives. And the older brother, by what he does not do. That's how the audience come to know the characters in this story. The younger brother by what he does, the father by what he gives, and the older brother by what he does not do. So here's what the story in these first few verses tells us the younger son does. He immediately starts the conversation. In this culture, that would not have been acceptable. In this culture, the father should be the one to start the conversation. If not the father, then the older brother. The younger son should know his place and not speak out of turn. But who starts the conversation? The younger brother. Immediately, he brings dishonor on the family name. Not only that, he starts the conversation and says, Father, give me my portion of the estate that is owed to me when you die. What is he effectively saying? Historians have looked at this and they've tried to understand if this was a common practice back in Jesus' day. What they've discovered is there are no Jewish laws to help settle this kind of request. The Jews had laws for everything. The Jews had laws for every situation or circumstance that might appear or happen, but this is one thing they had no law for. Why? Because it was unimaginable that a son would wish his father's death before it was time. That was the ultimate dishonor and shame in the culture. There are two contemporary examples of this happening, and here's what happened. So scholars have looked at and seen this did actually happen. One to a Syrian farmer, and when the son requested this, the father had him flogged and beaten, then the community flogged and beat him, and they chased him away, and he was never seen again. Okay? That's what would have happened in the shame honor culture. Another time it happened was to a wealthy doctor, and when his son asked this request, he had a heart attack and died. But there was no Jewish law to deal with the request of the younger son because it was so out of context. It was unimaginable that any son would wish for the death of his father. But here's what the younger son was ultimately saying, and you can flip your card, younger brother. What he's ultimately saying is, Father, I want what you can give me. I want what you have. Can someone control this child, please? Sorry. Isn't he cute? Oh, these sons. So, or maybe I should, eh? Come on, go. So, where was I? The younger son ultimately dishonors his father, saying, you know what, I want what you can give me. I don't want you. Father, by wishing you dead, but asking for your estate, I want what you can offer me. I want the life you're giving me. I want you sustaining me. I want the joy, the happiness, whatever it comes from being. I want what you can give me, but I don't want you. What it signifies is there's a broken relationship. The relationship between the younger son and the father is effectively dead, non-existent. The younger son, it says then, sells the estate. The picture you get when you look at the context is that this was also out of character, that in a few days the estate was dissolved of. Normally, even if a father divides his estate, it stays in the family possession and it stays his until he dies. And if someone were to sell it, it would take years to resolve and to work out because, the potential income that they would have had, they need to account for. It's just a long, long process. But here Jesus says within days, the son has cashed up, takes off from the father's presence and goes into a distant land and squanders the money. And here's what he ultimately does. He trades. He trades his future with the family for temporal gratification. He trades his family legacy for temporary indulgence. He trades future growth and future profits from the estate because it was his. He could have hung on to it. He could have multiplied the crops. He could have sold that. He could have grown the estate, but he trades that. He cashes that in for temporary enjoyment. He sells the future for now. And we look at the son and we're like, how could he do that? Who would do that? But don't we all? Don't we all in some way? What should have been enacted on the son, and Jesus doesn't mention it, it's a Hebrew custom called ketsatsa. Everyone say that with me. Ketsatsa. That is a cutting off ceremony. What should have happened at this point, and we saw that with that other example of the Syrian farmer, was they would have enacted the ceremony because great shame and dishonor was placed on the father and on the family name. Also in the village, they would have cut the son off from everything, chased him away from the family, chased him away from the village, and he would enter into that village again on possibility of death. Because that's what ketsatsa means. You're cut off. You're dead to us. That's what should have happened. But what do we see the father do? Instead, the father approaches the son. The father approaches the dishonorable son and pleads with him, gives him his request. Many ask the question, why did the father grant the request? Wasn't he complicit in this whole thing by actually giving in to the request of the son? Why didn't he just say, no, I'm not going to give you my estate. I'm not going to divide it up. Rather, we're going to invoke ketsatsa and you'll be seen to, you insolent little boy. Why doesn't he do that? Rather, the father gives, flip one card, and here's what the language, the nuance in the language actually implies. It uses the Greek word, when the father divides his estate, it says he divides his life, bios, which is where the Greek word life, and that most commonly means your actual life. And here's how that made sense to the Hebrew mind. Their land was their life. They believed that they were people of the land and that the land they didn't belong to them, they belonged to the land. The land wasn't theirs, they belonged to the land. And so with the land that was in the family, that was the family, was the land, because their sustenance, their viability, their standing in the community, their honor in the community, their ability to supply, everything was held up in the land. And so you divide the land, you're dividing your life. The father gave his life at the son's request. Instead of punishing and driving the son away, gives his life and then gives him his freedom. And at great expense to himself, at great cost to himself, his reputation, his image in the community, even at great cost, his life, he says, you know what? I'm going to grant you your request and your freedom, and here's why. Because I value relationship over obedience. Did you catch that? I'm going to grant you your freedom because I value relationship over obedience. And I know if I drive you away or I force you to remain, there will never be a promise or a hope of restored relationship. There will never be opportunity for mutual love and respect. There will never be opportunity for, once again, this reconciliation of what is clearly a strained relationship. So he says, instead of doing what is my right, doing what is our historical practice and customs, I am going to, at great cost to myself, give you your freedom because I value relationship over obedience. The older brother, you notice in this section of the story, we just have mention of him, but not much else. Mainly the interaction is between the younger brother and the father. Now this immediately to Jesus' listeners would have been weird because in the order of family and in the order of protocol, when there was a strained relationship, when the younger brother came to the father with this request, the older brother should be jumping in and going, whoa, 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 hey, back off, dude. You don't speak to dad like that. You do not dishonor our father like that. He should have been the one to stand in and go, wait, wait. And then if there was still strained relationship, the expectation in this community was that he would act as the mediator to try and restore relationship, to try and rebuild trust, and to try and connect the two. But the older brother is silent. He doesn't say anything. He's silent. This would have puzzled Jesus' listeners as well. The other thing is when the father divides his life, divides his estate, the younger son cashes up and takes off. The older son accepts the division and takes his share. He should never have done that in that custom, in that culture. He should have said, Dad, I will not have any part of this. I will not dishonor you in the same way as well. I will rather work with you until the day you die. Then and only then will I have any discussion or talk of inheritance. But instead, the older brother stays silent when he should be defending the father's honor, and he accepts his portion of the inheritance. Thanks, guys. Can we give a hand to our... And so the verse continues, the story continues. About this time, talking of the younger brother, his money ran out, and a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his field to feed the pigs. The picture Jesus is creating is one of utter despair. For a Jewish man, looking after pigs was the most disgraceful, the most inhumane, the most unfathomable act or situation that he could find himself in. Jesus was painting a picture of hell on earth, enslaved to a Gentile foreign landowner and keeping company with pigs. Eventually, after this son had squandered his father's estate, had used up his father's life, he found himself in this desperate situation and carries on. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. In the reality he found himself, in the situation he found himself, even what they considered to be unclean and disgusting and the lowest form of existence, a pig, was better off than he was. And here's what this highlights to us. Here's what this helps us understand. Indulging our appetites, running from the Father, being burdened by our foolish choices. The Bible also calls this sin. The path of sin always leads to emptiness, dissatisfaction, and hunger. It leaves you wanting. And here's why. Sin always promises what it cannot give. It always promises what it cannot give. And so it looks appealing, it looks enticing, it looks as though that's the exact thing that I want. I want to break away, I want to be autonomous, I want to get away from under my father's roof, I want to be able to do things my way. And that looks appealing. They're having fun. That looks awesome. It feels good, it feels right. Maybe I'll just... But in the end, sin always promises what it cannot give. And so Jesus highlights that journey with this young son keeping company with pigs. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. At home, even those that work for my father, even those that work on his land have enough." And so he determines, he says, "I will go home to my father." And here's what he says he will do, because the nature of this young man, he's run away, he's tried to live autonomously apart from the father. And he's not quite ready to go back and say, "You know what, Father, I'm wrong, I'm sorry, I will come under your leadership and your sovereignty again." Rather, he says, "You know what, even the craftsmen, even those that work on my dad's land, they have enough food, they're not going hungry, they even have leftover, there is plenty, they're satisfied. So what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll devise a plan. I'll say, you know what, Dad, I know I'm not worthy of you yet, but I will work as a craftsman until I earn enough. Until I earn enough. And even if I don't earn enough to get back into the family, I will earn enough to eat. I'll earn enough to survive." So he devises this autonomous plan. Even in his desperation, he still determines, "I'm going to do it my way." And he says, "You know what? I'll come and I'll say, Dad, I will work my way back into your favor. I'm not worthy of you yet, but I'll work as a craftsman and once again gain your favor." There is a slight shift in attitude though. And the sense we get is that in this place of desperation, this young man starts missing home. And one can only imagine, and maybe we wonder, if he wonders if home misses him. And so I don't know where you are in whatever situation you find yourself, but many times when we have maybe through our own choices alienated ourselves from God or from the community of faith, we often find ourselves going, we know where we are is not the best place. But do they miss me? Does God even care? Have they noticed that I'm gone? The other thing we notice is that there's a subtle shift in his attitude. He started the conversation with his father and he says, "Father, give me your estate. Give me what is mine. Give me what is owed to me. Give me what I'm entitled to." Sounds like the current generation, right? No. Whereas he now says, "You know what, Father, take me." Other translations say, here it says, "Take me on as a hired servant." Father, make me a hired servant. Father, fashion me, is how the King James puts it. Fashion me into one of your servants. And there's a subtle shift in posture, in attitude, that I think is really important. And I wonder what would be different for you and I if our prayers maybe were, instead of God, give me, were God, make me. Instead of God, give me, were God, take me. Instead of God, give me, were God, fashion me. And so it's with this posture, with this attitude, that he starts his journey home. So he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. You know that question that he might have been wondering? Yeah, I'm missing home right now. Is home missing me? Because here's the image Jesus paints. We often think maybe the father was standing looking out of his window. Maybe the father was kind of doing his business on his stoop, looked up, and there he saw the son. No, the picture Jesus creates, because here's what the village is, and here's what an artist's depiction is of what it might have looked like a village or a little farming village back in that day. Do we have that, Breno? The image. Where the village that was part of, and I know it's quite small, but you can see the little white dots in the background. That's the village, the farming land and community all around. But the villages and the village was right on top of each other. Everyone lived close together. You couldn't get to the wealthy estate, the lord of the village, the lord of the manor. You couldn't get to his house. You couldn't get to his dwelling without first walking through the streets of the village. And so the father knew this. The father knew that Ketsatsa had been put out against his son. It hadn't yet been enacted, and he knew that on the son's return, the expectation, the community was going to stand up for the honor of the father, condemn the son for his actions and the dishonor that he brought on the family name and on the village, and perform this ceremony to let him know that he was no longer welcome because he was cut off from community. That is what everyone was expecting would happen, and the father knew this as well. And so Jesus paints the picture that the father is actually standing on the edge of town. He's standing at the village gate. He's looking down the road, waiting, longing, wondering, is my son going to come home? And determining that if he does, if he sees him starting to come over the horizon, starting maybe to come over the hill and make his way to the village, that he was going to be the first one to get to him before anyone else in the village could. And we get that picture as well where Jesus says that the father ran. Now for us that doesn't seem like a significant thing, but for a man or anyone in a place of honor to run in this day and age was unheard of. One, because it wasn't dignified. Two, because it was impractical. They wore dresses, okay, that came right down to your ankles. Any of you worn a dress lately that's tight-fitting down to your ankles and tried to run? You trip up and fall pretty quickly. And so in order to run, what you'd have to do is you'd have to gather the cloak up to about waist high, exposing your knees and your legs, which in that culture and time was considered shameful, was considered dishonoring. But in order to run, you'd have to hold it there so that you could move your legs freely and run. And Jesus paints this amazing picture of a father who's been deeply wounded and already gone to great expense on behalf of the son, but then when he sees his son coming, he runs, again at great cost to himself, to his image, so that he can get to the son first and shield him from the condemnation and the judgment that was coming to him. Shield him from the hands of the villagers who were going to defend the father's honor because the older brother didn't. Shields him from whatever was coming his way. Instead, embraces him, kisses him, and welcomes him back into the home. Jesus carries on. His son said to him, remember, the son had a plan. His plan was he's going to work his way back into his father's favor. His plan was he's going to earn whatever and work as a hired hand for the father, earn his favor, earn some money enough so that he can purchase his way back into the family. And he starts trying to articulate his plan, but immediately, and we don't get it in the English, but we get it in the original language, there's a subtle shift from what his plan was to what he now declares in response to the father's embrace. Where he was going to say, Father, I've sinned against heaven and earth, and I'm not worthy now to be called your son, but I will work my way back as a craftsman, and you'll again look upon me favorably. Instead, he just says, Father, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. In response to the great love shown by the Father. But his father, in reply, calls the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house, put it on him, get a ring for his finger, sandals for his feet. Now here's simply what these mean. The robe is once again, it's a symbol of honor. The father wore the best robe whenever he went out in public. The father wore the best robe at the banquet or at any ceremonial place. And so here the father is saying, I bestow my honor. I bestow what is my entitlement, what is my worth. I bestow that onto my son. The way you in the community, the way anyone would have viewed me, that's how you should view my son. He's wearing my robe. And then he gives him a signet ring, and the ring, and I think this is the next slide, Breno, the signet ring, which is trust, because that means he now has entitlement to the father's estate. The father says, I now trust you with everything I have. I now trust you. And he gives this to him. Did the son do anything to earn that trust? Did the son do anything to earn the honor that the father gave? And then he says, get him sandals, put sandals on his feet, because slaves walk around barefoot, but he's not a slave. He's my son. Give him his dignity and his self-respect back. And you see, this was for the community to witness and see, but I think this was also for the son. Also for the son to understand and know his worth, his value. The father gives graciously at great cost to himself and restores the son into the family. Restores him back into reconciled relationship. And then the father declares, kill the calf we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. The whole village is invited to the celebration. And this was the father's way of demonstrating that him and his son are reconciled. The family's back together. The celebration has begun. And here's what the father declares. And he says, for the son of mine was dead and is now returned to life and is now alive. He was lost, but now he's found. He was dead relationally before he left. But now that he has come before me and understood and been embraced by my love, now that he has interacted and encountered the grace and love of the Father, and for the first time sees the Father for who he is, not someone that's to be feared, not someone that is trying to lord over him, but someone that deeply loves and cares for him. Now that the son encounters that for the first time in surrender, he simply says, Father, I'm not worthy. And the father graciously and at great cost to himself restores the son, invites him back into the family, and declares to the whole community, no judgment, no condemnation is going to go to him, but rather he's now again part of the family. We were relationally distant and dead, but now he's alive. Now he's alive to my love when before he was dead to it. Before, when he was trying to do things his own way and living life autonomously, he was dead to my love because he couldn't see it. He wouldn't embrace it. He ran away from it. But now, in this attitude, this posture of surrender, he's alive to my love. He's alive to my love. So let the party begin. Church, I don't know where you see yourself in the story. Next week, we're going to continue as we look at the interaction with the older brother and just what it all means coming together. But right now, I want us to sing the words of that song, because the realization for the younger brother was that who I thought Father was all wrong. Who I thought Father wanted, what I thought he wanted was all wrong. I thought under his family or under his household, under his sovereignty, that it was a place of oppression, that it was a place of enslavement, but rather I've discovered it's the total opposite. It's the place where I'm truly free. It's the place where I'm truly able to be me. And I see it now because I'm not running. I see it now because I'm not trying to do things my way, but rather I see it now because I'm alive relationally to his love. And what I'm realizing is that it's good. It's good. Exactly what Jesus was wanting his audience to see and encounter and realize. That God's extravagant, generous, and costly love, he extends and gives to each and every one of us. No matter where you are, no matter what you've been, no matter what your journey, your story, or even your motive, God wants to give you his love, his grace. He wants to restore you into a place of honor and dignity and self-respect and trust. And he wants you to know that you're not a slave. You're a child of God. You're one of his. And he's a good Father, and he loves each and every one of you. Let's pray. Lord, as we hear those words, we know that often we don't believe it. Often we don't feel it. Because we think that no one knows my story. No one knows my journey. But Jesus, what you are helping us to grasp and calling us to see is that it doesn't matter our journey, our story. You just want us to come alive to you relationally. You just want us to say, you know what? God, I surrender and I want to see, I want to encounter and experience your love and your grace. And I don't want what you can give me, but I want you to make me, Lord. I don't want what you have, I want you. Help me. And you do the rest. You restore, you revive, you help us come alive. And so that's our prayer today, Jesus. That'll be our experience, that we'll encounter your love and we'll rest in knowing that you're a good Father. A good Father. Amen.